The night has a memory, and in the Balkans, it remembers him. It whispers his name through broken branches, across ruined fortresses, and through the hollow bones of the men who tried to conquer him. Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, the Impaler. Even centuries later, the mere echo of his legend can tighten a man's chest, as if an invisible hand is gripping the heart and reminding it that true fear was once a living thing. And in the spring of 1462, that fear took shape, not in the form of an army or a fortress or a weapon, but a forest made of corpses. Imagine the Ottomans, tens of thousands of hardened soldiers marching north with drums, banners, and the full authority of an empire that had swallowed kingdoms like crumbs. They believed they knew war. They believed they understood terror. They believed that a small Wallachian prince, half exiled, half forgotten, would kneel the moment they crossed the Danube. What they did not know was that Vlad had prepared something far older than strategy, far darker than resistance. He had prepared a message. The scouts saw it first. They screamed before they spoke. Some refused to speak at all, because what they saw was not simply death. It was artistry, precision, punishment. Men lifted on wooden stakes, their bodies sagging like torn tapestries, the stakes rising out of their chests like dead branches. Miles of them. A forest with no leaves, no roots, no wind. Just silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Even seasoned janissaries felt their breath thicken as they approached, as if the air itself resisted their presence. And yet Vlad had done something even more unthinkable. The forest of the impaled was arranged, not randomly, not chaotically, but ceremonially. A grotesque architecture of suffering, every stake placed with mathematical cruelty. Prisoners, traitors, thieves, envoys, peasants, assembled like a human monument to defiance. At its center, the highest stakes pierced the bodies of those Vlad considered the most dangerous, spies, collaborators, and Ottoman officers captured in earlier raids, their faces twisted toward the sky, frozen mid-scream as if even death had refused to release them. Sultan Mehmed II himself, the conqueror of Constantinople, halted his march. The man who had crushed empires sat upon his horse and stared into the forest, and for a flicker of a moment, he hesitated. It was then he realized this was not madness, it was strategy.
To understand why this forest existed, why a prince would carve terror into the land itself, you must understand the world Vlad was born into. Wallachia was not a kingdom, it was a battlefield wearing the mask of a country. Every river, every village, every border carried the weight of two predators circling the same prey. On one side, the Christian kingdoms of Europe, fractured, suspicious, and drowning in their own politics. On the other, the unstoppable rise of the Ottoman Empire, methodical, hungry, and armed with a vision that did not tolerate resistance. Wallachia was the frontier between two worlds, a strip of soil soaked in fear and blood long before Vlad ever returned to claim it. And Vlad, he had learned the price of mercy early. As a child, he and his brother were held hostage in the Ottoman court. They were taught diplomacy, literature, and the anatomy of suffering. He watched the janissaries train, saw prisoners dragged through the halls, heard whispers of punishments even sultans did not speak openly of. He understood one truth: empires do not negotiate with weakness, they consume it. And so, when he finally ascended the throne of Wallachia, mercy had no place in his vocabulary, only survival, only retaliation. When the Ottomans demanded tribute, Vlad refused. When they demanded he present himself in Istanbul, he refused. And when Mehmed II sent envoys demanding submission, Vlad nailed their turbans to their skulls and sent them back as a message: "You may conquer lands, but you will not conquer me." The forest of the impaled was merely the climax of a long, brutal campaign. Before Mehmed's great army even marched, Vlad had already struck deep into Ottoman territory. He led night raids so sudden and violent that entire garrisons vanished without leaving a single survivor to recount what had happened. Villages along the Danube awoke to find their guards gone and their gates painted red with blood. Vlad's soldiers moved like ghosts, silent, disciplined, merciless. He knew he could not defeat an empire with swords alone, but he could infect it with something far more corrosive: doubt. If a man fears pain, he hesitates. If he fears the unknown, he falters. But if he fears what his mind cannot comprehend, if he fears a leader capable of turning thousands of bodies into a weaponized landscape, he breaks. And Vlad intended to break them long before they ever reached his borders.
By the time Mehmed's colossal army finally crossed into Wallachia, they were already walking inside Vlad's mind, inside his theater of psychological warfare. Every village they entered was empty, every well was poisoned, every barn was burned to its foundation. Trees were felled across roads, fields were scorched into blackened scars. Wallachia had become a wasteland, a silent maze designed to starve an army that fed on the countryside it conquered. There was no food, no livestock, no human being brave or foolish enough to remain. Vlad had evacuated his people into the mountains and forests, leaving behind a dead land, a trap. To men who had crushed Constantinople with cannons, siege towers, and engineering brilliance, this new enemy felt primitive, irrational, almost mythical. And that was exactly the point. The Ottomans marched deeper. The silence grew heavier. Days passed without a single direct battle. The air stank of burning wood and rotting crops. When the wind blew, it carried the faint, unsettling echo of something metallic, something hollow, like the land was breathing death. And then, the first warnings appeared. Along the road, stakes began rising from the ground like skeletal fingers. At first only a few, 1 or 2 bodies, twisted and slumped, the stake emerging through the chest cavity. But as the army advanced, the number increased, dozens, then hundreds. Some were Ottoman scouts captured only days before. Others were criminals from Wallachia, executed not out of necessity, but out of intention. Their corpses swung gently in the breeze, heads tilted, eyes half open, as if watching the soldiers approach. The Janissaries, hardened by years of battle, murmured prayers under their breath. Even the Sipahis tightened their reins, sensing something unnatural. War was predictable, death was predictable, but this was choreography, precision, a ritual of terror unfolding deliberately step by step, pulling them deeper into the unknown, Vlad's unknown. Mehmed tried to maintain discipline. He ordered the stakes cut down and the bodies buried, but the smell clung to the air, the imagery clung to their minds, and worst of all, every time they destroyed one line of impalements, another appeared only a few miles ahead, larger, fresher, more grotesque. At night, campfires flickered against the darkness, and soldiers whispered of Vlad as if he were a myth, a demon, a creature who fed on fear itself. Some swore they saw figures watching from the tree line, silent, unmoving. Others dreamt of waking up on stakes themselves. Because deep down, each soldier knew the forest was coming. The forest revealed itself at dawn. The Ottomans had marched through the night, exhausted, hungry, and fraying at the edges. The horizon was a sheet of pale gray, that cold hour where the world hasn't yet decided if it wants to live or die. Mist drifted low across the fields. Silence stretched so deep it felt like a living pressure on the chest. And then, the sun rose just enough to cut through the fog. And thousands of black silhouettes appeared. The soldiers froze where they stood. At first, the shapes looked like trees, thin trunks, tall, motionless. But the dawn sharpened the lines, and the truth surfaced like a nightmare stepping out of the shadows. These were not trees. These were bodies, human bodies,
impaled on stakes so tall they vanished into the morning haze. A sea of corpses. The forest of the impaled stretched for miles in every direction, an entire landscape transformed into a cathedral of death, each stake positioned with mathematical precision. Some bodies had decayed into mummified husks, others were so fresh their wounds still glistened. Blood-soaked robes fluttered weakly in the breeze. Open mouths, stiffened hands, empty eye sockets, frozen masks of agony lifted high above the earth as in perpetual prayer. But this was no chaotic massacre. Vlad had crafted this place, designed it, and at its heart stood the most grotesque arrangement, a massive circle of the tallest stakes, each bearing the corpse of an Ottoman officer captured during Vlad's earlier raids. Their uniforms were still recognizable. Their faces were twisted into final, impossible expressions, terror carved into bone. Mehmed II and his guard approached slowly. Even the conqueror of Constantinople, a man who had stood among the ruins of empires, felt the cold fingers of something beyond war crawling up his spine. This was psychological warfare at a scale the world had rarely witnessed. This was a message, written not in ink, but in flesh. Another chronicler claimed a janissary vomited the moment he saw the scale of the forest. Horses reared, refusing to move forward. Men prayed openly. Some wept. Some turned their faces away, unable to look upon what a single man, just one, had built from the bones of thousands. Vlad had done something almost impossible. He made the Ottoman army feel small.
And for the first time in his campaign, Mehmed questioned whether the price of conquering Wallachia was worth the terror that guarded it. That night, the Ottoman camp did not sleep. Tents rustled, lanterns flickered, and soldiers turned in their beds like men trying to escape their own thoughts. No songs, no laughter, no whispers of victory. Only the restless shifting of thousands who had glimpsed a level of cruelty that did not belong to the world of men. The forest had entered their minds. It gnawed at them. It infected them. And Vlad was not finished. Near midnight, the wind changed. A faint sound drifted across the plains, soft, rhythmic, almost like footsteps. Some soldiers thought it was the breeze, others thought it was their imagination. But the janissaries recognized it before anyone else, the distant click of hooves. A single rider, then more, dozens, moving with a strange, disciplined grace, as if gliding along the edge of the darkness. Then the torches ignited. A line of flames erupted outside the Ottoman camp, stretching across the fields like a burning serpent. Vlad's cavalry, his infamous night riders, had surrounded the enemy. Their armor was blackened, their horses draped in cloth to muffle sound. Their torches held high like floating stars in the void. They made no noise, no battle cry, no threat. They simply stood there, watching. It was not an attack, it was a reminder. The Ottomans sprang into formation, but there was nothing to strike, nothing to defend against. The riders remained motionless, their silhouettes flickering in the firelight. And then, without a signal, they turned their torches toward the distant skyline, toward the forest of the impaled, and raised them in a single, synchronized gesture. It was as if they were saluting their own masterpiece. Fear rippled through the camp like a sickness. Some soldiers believed the riders were the dead returned from the stakes, resurrected to guard their own corpses. Others insisted Vlad was among them, watching, judging, waiting for the perfect moment to carve deeper into their minds. In the center of the camp, Mehmed stood rigid, jaw clenched. He had faced crusaders, rebels, and kings, but this enemy was different. Vlad was not fighting for territory. He was fighting for psychological domination. He was fighting to make an empire hesitate. And it was working.
As the night deepened, the riders extinguished their torches one by one, vanishing into the darkness as silently as they had appeared. By dawn, only ashes remained on the grass, but the message lingered. If the forest did not break you, the night would. By the time the sun rose again, the Ottoman camp looked like a defeated city, men pale with exhaustion, horses trembling, commanders speaking in clipped, shaken tones. The empire that had crushed Constantinople felt something unfamiliar pressing against its throat. Uncertainty, doubt, the kind of invisible weight that makes even the strongest armies wonder whether they have walked into a war or a curse. Mehmed ordered the march to continue, but every step forward felt heavier than iron. The air itself seemed poisoned by the memory of the forest. Soldiers avoided looking toward the bodies, but they could feel them. Thousands of silent witnesses hanging above the earth, each one a warning carved from the flesh of men just like them. Every creak of a harness sounded like a dying breath, every snapped twig like a stake being driven into the ground. Imagination became their enemy, and Vlad knew it. This was not simply brutality, it was engineering, a manipulation of human fear so precise it worked on the deepest parts of the mind, the part that still believed in monsters. And then came the final blow. Several miles ahead, the Ottomans reached a crossroads where scouts reported movement. Mehmed braced for a battle. He expected ambush, arrows, maybe another burning line of riders. What he encountered instead was worse. A single stake, taller than the rest, rising from the earth with a lonely, dreadful dominance. At its top was the corpse of Vlad's own boyar, a noble who had betrayed him, attempted to defect, and offered intelligence to the Ottomans in exchange for protection. Vlad had captured him first. The message was undeniable. Not even my own people escaped the stake. What chance do you have? That was the moment something broke silently inside the Ottoman ranks. A psychological fracture. Soldiers who had marched resolutely now walked like shadows. Captains avoided the Sultan's gaze. And Mehmed, for the first time in the entire campaign, understood the truth. A battlefield could be measured in miles, but fear had no borders. Vlad had weaponized terror so thoroughly that even victory felt like death.
Days later, after a series of skirmishes and the infamous night attack where Vlad nearly assassinated Mehmed inside his own camp, the Sultan made a decision unthinkable for a ruler of his stature. He turned back. The campaign ended. Wallachia remained unconquered. Vlad had done the impossible. He stopped an empire with corpses. He carved fear so deeply into the Ottoman mind that even the soldiers who survived carried it home like a shadow stitched to their souls. And history would remember him not just as a prince, but as the man who built a forest of death to humble an empire.